All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to talk about Greek geography, or in other words, where we always start when we enter a new area of the world, how the geographical features in an area impacted the people who were living there. Before we actually make our how geography impacted the region chart, let's figure out what area of the world we are talking about. So, if we go down to this map, we can see that Greece and its colonies were about right here. Greece was surrounded by this big, scary, or not so scary, depending on your perspective, thing called the Persian Empire. That is in yellow. Keep that in mind as we move forward because the Persian Empire is going to be relevant later in the unit. Okay, that being said, let's talk about geographical features and their impact. So, the first geographical feature that had a huge impact on Greece was the fact that Greece was very, very mountainous. So you had a lot of mountains surrounded by valleys and valleys surrounded by mountains, which makes a little bit more sense. And each of these valleys had a little pocket or a little community actually living in it. Because these valleys were the only livable places and were relatively small, it meant that communities were divided up into our old friends, the city-states. And these city-states were, in fact, divided. It was difficult to talk from one city-state to another because, hey, there's a giant mountain in the way. And that means that as each of these city-states in ancient Greece grew and grew and grew into highly developed civilization-type communities, they had their own independent culture and identities. And that is going to leave the Greek city-states very divided and difficult to unite them, which will be, as I said in the beginning, important later in the unit. This also means that because each of these valleys are relatively small, that each of these city-states is going to have a relatively small population. And whereas in all of the other city-states and empires we've seen so far, people tended to only participate in politics in the form of paying taxes, the populations were small enough in many of the Greek city-states that people could actually participate in politics hands-on, so they could actually have a big impact on the government. We're going to see how that pans out later in the unit when we talk more in depth about the governments of each of the Greek city-states. For our next geographical feature, we have to go back and look at the map and see that Greece is in fact surrounded by water on pretty much all sides except one. One of the natural advantages of Greece is that it had a lot of naturally forming ports and harbors, so that it was easy to get ships in and out. This meant that Greece is going to make a lot of their money on trading because it was relatively easy to do so compared to other places, and it meant that Greece is going to establish a lot of colonies, or in other words, they're going to take their fleets and go out and conquer another area and say, hey area, you're going to be under our control now, give us a bunch of stuff. Or maybe we'll settle our people here too so we can all just get along and be happy. These colonies are going to be established on the islands in the Mediterranean around Greece or on the coast of Turkey, which is called Ionia. Next, let's talk about this area that's kind of hanging off of the rest of Greece like a wilted zombie hand. This area is known as the Peloponnesus, and it is separated from the rest of Greece by something called an isthmus. An isthmus is a narrow strip of land surrounded on both sides by water that connects two larger pieces of land together. So, for example, if this and this were pieces of land, then that in the middle would be an isthmus, and the Peloponnesus is separated by an isthmus from the rest of the Greek city-states. There is one very, 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 very famous Greek city-state on the Peloponnesus, and that is Sparta, which is probably one of the main reasons why Sparta had such a different culture from the other Greek city-states, which we will talk about, say it with me, later in the unit. Okay, finally, the last thing we have to talk about, shut up air conditioning, shut up, you're too loud, nobody likes you, is Greece's rocky soil, which nobody likes either. Rocky soil is bad for grain. And we like grain here in world history. It's kind of the foundation of this class. But you still gotta eat even if you can't grow your own grain, so Greece had to import it. We'll look at where they imported it from in just a moment. However, this rocky soil was good for growing two crops that made you a ton of money. Grapes that people made wine out of, and olives that people made olive oil out of. They would export these two products to buy grain. So, who are they exporting these things to so they can import grain from? Well, the colonies. Remember, Greece had a lot of colonies on islands in the Mediterranean Sea and on the Ionian coast. They would buy grain from these colonies, and then they would sell grapes and olives to these colonies, and the circle goes round and round. So, as you can see, Greece is really going to need those colonies, and it's going to get them into trouble.